At a warehouse entrance, a reversing delivery truck closes the gap beside a heavy sliding metal gate, turning a routine backing move into a tightening blind zone hazard. At a crowded construction site, a worker climbs onto the yellow machine housing to reach equipment above. At the same moment, the excavator bucket swings down into the same operating zone. Inside a small fireworks mixing shed built on a hillside, a metal wheelbarrow of loose pyrotechnic powder is being rolled into the open workspace when a single spark flashes through the dust cloud and the mixture ignites in an instant. Inside a small roadside stall, two people were working at a table near the open entrance when a car suddenly leaves the road and bursts through the front of the shop. On a quiet roadside near a bridge barrier, a truck pulls away along the narrow street when a large flatbed trailer suddenly breaks free and rolls forward toward the concrete wall. Always confirm the trailer hitch, locking pin, and safety connections are fully secured before moving any vehicle with a trailer. Inside a chemical facility in Dothi Gudam village, a worker begins mixing chemicals inside a large drum. Within moments, a sudden reaction ignites, sparking a fast-moving fire inside the mixing area. Chemical mixing operations must strictly control substance compatibility, handling procedures, and ignition risks. At an industrial construction yard, a crane lifts a massive cylindrical structure over a trailer while the load begins drifting offline. Then the boom structure gives way and the suspended weight drops out of control. Do not operate elevated work platforms beneath or inside the swing path of a suspended crane load. On a sidewalk beside a red flatbed truck, two workers try to manually lift a large metal cabinet onto the truck bed. As they raise it, the tall cabinet suddenly tips sideways off balance. Never manually lift oversized or top-heavy equipment without mechanical lifting support. Inside a quiet work area, a worker stands beside equipment along a concrete walkway. Suddenly, a vehicle crashes straight through the wall and into the work zone. Never, ever assume a work area is protected just because it sits behind a wall or structure. At the construction site, a worker uses his own body weight to guide an object being lifted by a crane, then suddenly loses stable control and is left suspended with the rigging. Do not use your body as a counterforce to control a suspended load. Always guide crane-lifted objects with proper positioning, approved taglines, and safe lifting procedures. Inside a busy factory packing line, workers move a long aluminum ladder through a narrow aisle between moving boxes. Then the ladder suddenly pivots upright and drops across the work area. Do not move long ladders through crowded work areas without controlling their balance and ensuring the path is completely clear. On a roadway, workers climb onto the top of a tanker truck to access the hatch. Suddenly, a massive cloud of vapor bursts out of the tank and spreads across the area, then ignites in a flash of flame. Never open or work on pressurized or volatile tanks without controlled venting and proper safety procedures. In a quiet yard, a man climbs a ladder to cut a thick tree branch overhead. Then the limb breaks free and drops onto the ladder, driving it suddenly off balance. Do not cut branches directly above a ladder without securing the ladder and controlling the direction of the falling limb. At an industrial loading platform, workers watch as a large load hangs suspended above the work area. When the lifting support suddenly gives way and the load drops from the rigging, workers should stay completely clear of the area beneath suspended loads during lifting operations. Beside a parked dump truck at an outdoor work site, a worker steps onto what looks like solid ground. In the next instant, the surface gives way, revealing an unsecured cover over a liquid-filled pit beneath the surface. Always verify that covers, grates, and work surfaces above pits or tanks are properly secured and capable of supporting weight before stepping onto them. On a highway bridge, several road workers stand behind a maintenance truck directing traffic with flags. Suddenly, an approaching truck fails to slow down and slams into the parked work vehicle. Work zones on active roads require strong traffic control measures and clear separation between workers and moving vehicles. At a busy loading yard, a worker stands on the back of a truck, repositioning heavy stone slabs. when one massive panel suddenly shifts, sliding across the truck bed and throwing the load dangerously off balance. Handle large stone panels and heavy sheet materials using proper lifting support and controlled positioning rather than manual force alone. Inside an auto repair shop, a car is lifted high on a hydraulic hoist while maintenance is performed underneath. Suddenly, a heavy mechanical component loosens and drops from beneath the vehicle. Work under lifted vehicles requires securing all components and maintaining a protected workspace beneath the lift. Beside a roadside power line project, a crane truck lifts a heavy utility pole from the ground. As the boom raises the load, the weight suddenly shifts, tipping the truck onto its side. Crane trucks must be properly stabilized and positioned before lifting heavy loads to prevent overturning. When a crane lifts a heavy object, the load creates a turning force around the truck's base. If the load moves beyond the machine's stability limits, gravity pulls the center of mass outside the support points, causing the vehicle to tip. Lifting operations depend on stability and proper load balance. Once the center of gravity moves past the support base, the machine will overturn. Inside a workshop, a worker places one end of a long plank on the floor and tries to break it by stepping on it. The moment his foot lands, the opposite end of the plank suddenly whips upward like a lever. Use proper cutting or breaking tools when handling long boards instead of applying force that can cause sudden rebound. When force is applied to one end of a flexible board resting on a pivot point, the board behaves like a lever. If the stored energy releases suddenly, the opposite end can whip upward at high speed. Improvised methods can create unexpected motion. Use the correct tools to control how materials break. Inside a busy control room corridor, a worker walks past electrical cabinets and bumps into a ladder left in the walkway. Then the tall frame tips and drops across the passage. Keep ladders properly secured or stored when not in use, especially in active walkways and work corridors. At an industrial yard, a worker climbs onto a tanker truck while vapor vents from an open hatch. In seconds, a sudden pressure burst erupts from the tank, blasting upward and throwing nearby objects off balance. Work on pressurized tanks only after the system is fully depressurized and properly vented. Pressurized tanks store large amounts of energy within compressed gases or heated vapors. When a hatch or valve suddenly releases that pressure, the expanding gas creates a powerful upward force capable of throwing nearby objects or workers off balance. Pressure systems must always be stabilized before opening or accessing them. Stored energy can release instantly and with extreme force. At a company entrance, a trailer hauling large fabric rolls turns through the gate when the cylindrical load suddenly begins to roll and shift across the trailer. Heavy cylindrical cargo must be properly restrained and stabilized during transport to prevent rolling or falling during vehicle movement. At a roadside loading area, a pickup truck is stacked high with tightly packed mattresses while the tall load shifts during adjustment. Then the entire stack tips sideways off the truck. Overstacked cargo must be evenly balanced and properly restrained before anyone climbs or works on top of the load. When cargo is stacked high above the vehicle frame, the center of gravity rises dramatically. A small shift in weight or tension can create a tipping moment that pulls the entire stack sideways. Tall loads amplify instability. Secure, stabilize, and control the load before working around it. In a wooded clearing, a worker stands on a ladder, cutting a long tree branch. The moment the cut completes, the heavy branch swings back toward the trunk like a pendulum. When cutting branches under tension, workers should position themselves outside the potential swing path. At a vehicle wash ramp, a pickup truck approaches slowly while a worker stands ahead guiding the driver. Suddenly, the truck accelerates forward and surges down the ramp toward the spotter. Drivers should maintain controlled speed and clear communication when approaching workers who are guiding vehicles. When a vehicle accelerates on a downward ramp, gravity and engine force combine to increase forward momentum quickly. With little distance to react, the vehicle's kinetic energy carries it directly through the worker's guiding zone. Vehicle guidance zones must stay clear of sudden acceleration. Slow, controlled movement is essential when workers are spotting. Inside a tight, brick-walled garage, a man leans forward to crank the handle of a small tractor. The engine suddenly kicks back, sending the crank handle snapping violently in the opposite direction. When starting machinery with a manual crank, operators should keep stable footing and maintain enough clearance from surrounding surfaces. Manual crank starters can suddenly rotate or kick back when the engine engages. That sudden torque transfers force to the operator's arms and body, pushing them off balance. Manual start systems can jerk violently when the engine fires. Always keep space around you when cranking machinery. At a construction site, a worker pushes a long metal rod into a stuck running concrete mixer. Suddenly, the spinning drum grabs the rod and whips it upward with the rotation. Workers should keep tools and body parts away from rotating machinery while it is operating. In a narrow construction lane, a worker stands between two vehicles, seconds before one of them starts to move. Mid-afternoon on a city street, under repair. Barriers line a fresh pavement cut while a dump truck idles near the curb and a van sits just ahead. Between them, a worker moves casually, as the driver, high in the cab, cannot see the area directly below the hood or near the front bumper, and no spotter is present. The truck eases forward. From the cab, everything seems clear, but the worker remains just out of sight, hidden by the orange barrel. The wheel nudges ahead before the operator halts, realizing too late how limited the view was. Never, ever stand or work in front of or behind a truck without clear eye contact and acknowledgement from the driver. Heavy vehicles move slowly, but blindly. Always maintain visual or radio communication before approaching or crossing near trucks. At the edge of a deep construction pit, a crawler crane lifts a machine from the excavation floor. When the rigging suddenly fails, shifting the load and pulling the crane sharply toward the edge, lifting operations must use properly rated rigging and controlled load positioning to prevent sudden force shifts during hoisting. At a small construction site, two workers drop a 50-kilogram cement bag from the roof toward the ground below, where someone reaches out to stop the falling load. Heavy construction materials must be lowered using controlled methods such as hoists, ropes, or mechanical handling instead of manual catching. A falling load gains momentum as gravity accelerates it downward. When someone tries to intercept it, the momentum of the moving mass can exceed what manual handling can safely control. Gravity multiplies the force of falling materials. Controlled lowering methods protect workers from sudden impact forces. On a gravel driveway, a compact tractor begins driving onto a flatbed trailer behind a pickup truck. When the truck suddenly rolls forward while the tractor is halfway up the ramp, shifting both machines toward the edge of the drive. Vehicles and trailers must be fully secured and immobilized before loading heavy equipment. Inside a shopping mall corridor, a worker stands on a tall stepladder while reaching overhead. Suddenly, he loses balance, and gravity pulls him downward. Work at height requires stable ladder placement and controlled body positioning to prevent sudden loss of balance. When the center of mass moves outside the ladder's support base, gravity quickly accelerates the downward motion, and the ladder can no longer remain stable. Height multiplies the consequences of small balance errors. Stable ladders and controlled movement keep gravity from taking over. Inside a warehouse filled with towering stacks of aluminum cans, a forklift inserts its forks into one of the tall pallet columns. When the stack shifts and the unstable load begins collapsing through the row of pallets, forklift operations around tall pallet stacks require controlled lifting and stable stacking to prevent structural collapse of stored loads. At a demolition site, an excavator tears into the lower level of a multi-story concrete building. Suddenly, the structure loses support, and the structure begins folding sideways through the frame. Demolition work must follow a controlled sequence that maintains structural stability while removing load-bearing elements. Buildings rely on load paths that transfer weight through columns and walls to the foundation. When key structural supports are removed unevenly, the load redistributes suddenly and gravity pulls the structure into collapse. Structures fail when their load paths disappear. Controlled demolition sequencing prevents sudden structural collapse. Outside a hospital driveway, an ambulance begins reversing along the curved road. While the rear blind zone remains hidden behind the vehicle, drivers must visually confirm the path behind their vehicle before and during reversing. In a backyard clearing, two people pull a rope tied high to a tall tree, trying to bring it down. The tree suddenly snaps free, but instead of falling away, the fall line shifts and the tree drops along the pull direction. Tree felling requires controlled cutting direction and a clear escape zone to keep the fall path away from workers. When a tree is pulled without proper directional cuts, its center of mass determines the fall. If the pull line aligns with the workers, gravity guides the trunk directly toward that line. Trees follow physics, not intentions. Control the fall direction and keep the drop zone clear. At a construction site, a worker steps onto a narrow plank used as a temporary walkway laid across uneven ground. When the board suddenly snaps and the unsupported span collapses, temporary walkways must be properly rated, secured, and supported before anyone steps onto them. In a front yard, several people pull on a rope tied high to a tall tree to bring it down. The trunk suddenly tips, but the fall line shifts, and the tree begins dropping along the pull direction instead of away. Tree removal must control the fall direction and keep everyone outside the drop zone. A tree rotates around its base once gravity overcomes the remaining support. If the pulling force and the tree's center of mass align toward the crew, the trunk will fall along that same path. Falling trees follow gravity, not intention. Plan the direction and clear the fall zone before pulling. On a roadside, a small excavator begins driving onto the rear of a flatbed truck. When the shifting weight lifts one side of the trailer and the load balance suddenly tips sideways. Loading heavy equipment requires stable ramps, proper weight distribution, and a secured transport vehicle. Standing on a ladder, a worker uses a chainsaw to cut into a tall tree trunk. As the cut deepens, the trunk suddenly shifts, pushing the ladder support point out of alignment. Do not cut a tree while positioned on a ladder against the trunk. Tree felling requires a stable work position, a planned escape route, and full control over the intended direction of movement before the cut is completed. As the cut removes supporting wood fibers, the tree's center of mass begins shifting toward the side with less resistance. Any sudden trunk movement transfers force into the ladder, turning the support point unstable almost instantly. A tree can change direction the moment its support is weakened. Stay off the trunk, stay off the ladder, and control the fall path from a stable position. Inside a metal workshop, a worker tries to reposition a long, heavy industrial component lying on the floor. As it shifts upright, the massive piece suddenly tips sideways and crashes back across the shop floor. Never try to manually reposition a long, heavy industrial part unless it is properly supported, stabilized, and controlled with the right handling equipment. Large components can shift their balance without warning once they begin rotating out of a flat resting position. Inside a small workshop, a machinist stands beside a running metal lathe while talking on his phone. In a moment of distraction, he steps closer to the spinning shaft. Workers should remain fully focused and keep hands clear of rotating machinery while equipment is operating. Inside a partially built structure, one worker stands beside adjustable support props while one works from a ladder. Without warning, a loose wooden board above them slips free from its position. Materials stored or handled overhead should always be secured, and workers should avoid standing directly beneath elevated objects. Objects positioned above ground level store gravitational potential energy. When they become unstable or lose support, gravity accelerates them downward, creating a sudden falling object hazard. Loose materials above a work zone can fall instantly. Always secure overhead items and keep clear below. In a residential driveway, a worker stands on top of a van, handling a large flat panel. Suddenly, a gust of wind catches the sheet and lifts it like a sail. Large, lightweight panels should be secured and handled carefully when working at height, especially in windy conditions. Inside a warehouse loading bay, several workers stand talking beside a stacker machine, lifting a tall pile of plastic pallets. Suddenly, the towering stack shifts balance and begins to tip sideways. Workers should stay clear of elevated or stacked loads while lifting equipment is operating. Tall stacked loads raise the center of gravity of the lift system. When the load becomes unbalanced or shifts forward, gravity creates a tipping moment that can cause the stack to fall. Suddenly, stacked loads can become unstable without warning. Always keep distance from raised materials and lifting equipment. In a quiet driveway, a delivery worker stands at the back of a van unloading items. Suddenly, a gust of wind catches the open rear door and swings it wide. Vehicle doors should be secured or held firmly when working in windy conditions. Outside a house, a worker stands on a ladder working on an open electrical panel while another worker stands behind him. In an instant, the exposed conductors arc and flash from the panel. Electrical systems should always be de-energized and properly tested before working on exposed service conductors. Live electrical conductors carry high voltage and current. When a tool, conductor, or contact point bridges energized components, it can create an arc flash, an intense electrical discharge that releases heat and energy instantly. Live electrical panels can release energy without warning. Always isolate power before working on electrical systems. At a dockyard, a crane begins lifting a full-size boat with wide lifting straps placed beneath the hull. As the vessel rises, one rigging point slips loose, and the suspended load suddenly shifts in midair. Avoid lifting a boat or any suspended load until every sling, lifting point, and balance angle has been fully checked and secured. A suspended vessel must remain evenly supported from the first inch of lift to prevent sudden load transfer or uncontrolled movement. A suspended load stays stable only when lifting forces are shared correctly across all rigging points. If one strap slips or loses tension, the center of gravity shifts immediately, forcing the remaining support points to carry uneven load and causing the suspended vessel to swing or drop unexpectedly. Suspended loads rely completely on rigging integrity and balance. Verify strap placement, confirm equal support, and never rush the lift. At a muddy construction site, a crane attempts to lift a heavy tractor with its long boom extended. As the load rises, the crane suddenly loses balance. Never attempt a heavy lift unless the crane is on stable ground, properly set up, and operating well within its rated limits. Load weight, boom length, ground condition, and lift radius must all be confirmed before the hoist begins. In a yard, a flatbed truck carrying heavy machinery begins moving, while the unsecured load begins sliding sideways across the truck bed. Vehicle movement and unsecured loads must never happen at the same time during transport operations. Heavy cargo must be secured before motion begins because even a short vehicle movement can turn stored mass into uncontrolled movement. When the truck accelerates, brakes, or changes direction, inertia causes the cargo to keep moving relative to the trailer. If restraints are missing or inadequate, friction alone cannot resist that force, and the load begins sliding in the direction of least resistance. Heavy cargo keeps moving when the truck moves. Secure the load before any vehicle motion. On Freeport Boulevard, a crane lifts the large Rayleigh's storefront sign as crews prepare to remove it for refurbishment. Suddenly, the sign detaches from the rigging and the suspended load drops free. Large suspended structures must be properly rigged and secured before lifting operations begin. Standing on a ladder beside a large tree, a worker uses a long pole to push a broken branch loose. The moment the branch releases, the heavy section swings down along the tension arc beside the trunk. Do control damaged branches from a safe location outside the expected swing path and drop zone before applying force. Branches under tension can release suddenly and move through the space beside and below the breakpoint. A partially broken branch stores energy through bending, tension, and its remaining attachment to the trunk. Once released, gravity and that stored tension combine to drive the branch along a fast swinging arc toward the area below and beside the pivot point. Damaged branches do not fall gently once support gives way. Stay outside the swing path and control the release from a safe distance. On a ship's deck, a worker strikes a heavy chain with a hammer to force it loose. The moment the tension releases, the chain snaps back under load. Workers should stay clear of tension chains or rigging and release the load carefully using proper tools. At a highway construction site, a crane lifts a massive bridge segment into position. Suddenly, the heavy slab loses support and drops from rigging. Workers should stay clear of suspended loads and maintain exclusion zones during heavy lifting operations. Large concrete sections carry enormous weight and rely entirely on lifting points and rigging for stability. If the load shifts or the support fails, gravity immediately pulls the mass downward, releasing massive kinetic energy. Suspended structures can fall without warning. Always keep clear of heavy lifts and respect exclusion zones. Under a lifted vehicle in a garage, a mechanic works beneath the drivetrain while loosening a heavy component. Suddenly, this large gearbox drops downward from the mounting point. Heavy vehicle components should always be supported with proper lifting equipment before removing bolts or mounts. Inside a car wash bay, a worker scrubs a police SUV while standing beside the moving wheel track. In one sudden step, the worker's footing slips into the narrow space beside the guide rail. Keep feet, footwear, and body position clear of vehicle guide rails and wheel tracks whenever a vehicle is being positioned or pulled through an automated wash system. Workers should stay on stable walking surfaces and maintain enough clearance so a small slip, step, or shift does not place them into a pinch point beside the moving tire path. Car wash conveyor tracks guide tires through a narrow and controlled path, but that same path creates tight floor-level pinch zones along the rails. When a vehicle's weight is concentrated through the tires and directed along the guide system, anything entering that space can be pinned quickly by the combined force of motion, alignment, and tire pressure. Guide rails can look harmless until a vehicle begins moving through them. Good footing, careful positioning, and clear distance from the tire path are essential for staying safe inside a wash bay. On a factory floor, a worker leans close over a circular conveyor machine while inspecting the moving line. In a split second, loose hair drifts toward the rotating mechanism. Keep hair, clothing, and loose items secured and away from moving machinery. On a scrapyard trailer, a worker carries a metal frame from the center, forgetting it is already wrapped around his body, then tries to throw it toward the pile. Do not carry or throw large open metal frames without first checking how the material is positioned around your body. Always reset your grip, confirm full clearance, and control the frame before moving it. A large open frame can stay looped around the handler when carried from the middle because the shape extends around the body without feeling fully obstructed. The moment a throwing motion begins, that hidden positioning turns the frame into a rotating structure, pulling its path around the worker instead of cleanly away. Before throwing irregular scrap, stop and check exactly how the frame is sitting around you. Control the shape first, then move it only when the path is fully clear. Inside a busy warehouse lane, a worker walks along the pallet conveyor area while a forklift approaches carrying a tall stack of crates. The load blocks the driver's forward view as the vehicle moves into the same path. Maintain clear pedestrian zones and ensure forklift operators have unobstructed visibility when transporting loads. At a scrapyard work area, a worker swings a hammer downward to strike a metal piece near the edge of a container. In a split second, the hammer's path slips and redirects along a new swing path. Do maintain controlled striking distance and keep all parts of the body outside the full swing path when using impact tools. The workpiece should be positioned securely, and the worker's stance should allow the tool to miss the body completely even if the strike glances off, slips, or rebounds from the target surface. A hammer builds kinetic energy through speed and mass during the swing. If the striking face hits at the wrong angle, slips off the edge, or rebounds from a hard surface, that energy does not disappear. It redirects instantly along a new path, determined by the contact angle and momentum of the tool. Impact tools can change direction in a fraction of a second when the strike is not perfectly controlled. Safe body position, proper target setup, and disciplined swing clearance are what keep that energy away from the operator. Inside an industrial workshop, a massive 220-inch ring sizer stretches a large aluminum ring used for aircraft engine housing components. As the hydraulic piston drives down, the machine builds enormous force inside the ring structure. Inspect components for structural defects and maintain safe distance from high-force forming machines during pressurization. On a busy street delivery, a worker stands on the flatbed of a truck, adjusting several large vertical glass panels. In a sudden moment, one tall sheet shifts past its balance point and begins tipping. Secure large sheet materials with proper restraints, stable support frames, and controlled handling methods whenever panels are stored or adjusted in a vertical position. Workers should position themselves away from the panel's tipping arc and avoid standing where a small shift in angle could place them directly in the fall path. Large glass sheets have a tall center of gravity and very limited tolerance for uncontrolled movement once they begin leaning beyond their support angle. If the restraint system loosens or the base support shifts, gravity creates a strong tipping moment that accelerates the panel downward with increasing momentum across the full height of the sheet. Vertical sheet materials can look stable right up until their balance changes. Proper restraints, careful positioning, and staying out of the tipping zone are essential whenever large panels are being handled. Don't forget to share what you learned today in the comments. Your insight could save a life. Take care.